Hello, welcome to The Point. I'm so glad you've joined us. This is 27 minutes on the human body, which, let me tell you straight away, is the most miraculous piece of machinery that's ever been built in the universe. It is absolutely amazing. There's no way at all that the human body could ever have evolved by chance in the primordial slime 3.8 billion years ago. It's just not possible. I'm going to be looking through various systems in the body. These are just some of them. There are lots and lots of different systems. I'm just going to talk around each different system just to give you a feel. Now, all of these systems I'm going to be doing individual programs on, but the purpose of this program is to just give you an overview of the whole system, just to show you how complicated the whole thing is, and to concentrate your mind on the creator of the human body. His name is Jesus Christ. In the Bible, if we look at John chapter 1, verses 1 to 4, I'm just going to read the Bible to you. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God." Sorry. "And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men." Now that's what the Bible actually says, that Jesus Christ is the one who created the universe and gave us life. That's what the Bible says. I know that in this secular world, the Western world we live in, most people seem to think that it all happened by chance. I'm actually a medical doctor. I've been working in and around the human body for over 30 years. But more recently, I've been studying, again, if you like, how the human body works. I spent 5 years in medical school between the ages of 17 and 22, and I was taught how the various systems worked in rather a sort of dry way, because it was concentrated on disease. Like, for example, well, this is how the ear works, but when it goes wrong, this is what happens. In other words, there was a lot of emphasis on the disease and not a lot of emphasis on how the ear works in the first place. So I'm not going to be talking about disease. Dr. Laura does that very well, and how to stay well. I'm simply going to concentrate on simply how the body actually is created in the first place, so you can concentrate on the designer, whose name is Jesus Christ. Okay. If we go back to the Bible again, about Adam and Eve, it says in Genesis 2, verse 7, "The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." Now, what we want to see from this is that God is a spirit. God is a spirit. He's not a human being like we are. God is a spirit, and he breathes into this inanimate thing that he created called Adam, which was lifeless, into him the spirit of life, and man became a living being. So although we're created in the image of God, we are living beings. God is a spirit, he's eternal. And actually the spirit part of us also is eternal, and one day when we go to be with him, we will live forever and forever and forever in resurrection bodies, which will never die, never grow old, never go sick. And we won't need doctors and nurses either, by the way. But the point is, what I'm trying to do now is we're currently living in a living body. So what we're going to do now is just look at some of the systems of the living body. Now, the living body is designed using a genetic code. It's called DNA. You can see a picture of this famous spiral. It's called DNA. It's, the official name is deoxyribonucleic acid. And it's the most complex genetic code in the universe. There's nothing that comes remotely close. It's incredibly complicated. I've actually got a whole program just on DNA, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about DNA right now, just to tell you that it's incredibly complicated. Now, for example, you're familiar with your computer, okay? Your computer has a code, which is a whole series of zeros and ones. All right. Now, your DNA is a spiral of 4 nucleotides. That's what it is. But they are genetically encoded so that the information on that code the information you could put on that code is absolutely enormous. 1 teaspoon of DNA, and you could put all the information on all the hard disks of all the servers and all the computers of the whole of the Earth, and a lot more besides. It's incredibly powerful, is DNA. Very powerful, for the very simple reason is it has to create something, our cells, which are themselves really complicated. Now, that particular picture you've got up there is DNA, which has been spread out over 6 feet. Now, we have 100 trillion cells in our bodies, and of course each individual cell is tiny. But if you spread each cell out, each DNA strand out, it's 6 feet long. And you've got 3 billion different genetic codes in each individual strand of DNA, for a very good reason. Because all of those genetic codes are programmed with different codes. Now, I'm going to show you what a brain cell looks like. A brain cell is really complicated. I don't know if you can see there's the brain. Now, it's really complicated. There are messages traveling along there at 250 miles per hour. Your brain is really, really complicated. It's the most complicated computer in the universe. It's far more complicated than 1,000 NASA supercomputers. And what's more, the brain generates its own electricity, and the electrical impulses pass through the brain at 250 miles an hour. It's incredibly complex. Each individual cell is connected to 10,000 other cells. And that's what your memory is. It's all these different cells connected to other cells. And it's all electrical impulses. It creates its own electricity, your brain does. And you can actually run a light bulb, a 25-watt light bulb from your brain. But even a NASA supercomputer, you have to plug it into the mains. No, your brain creates its own electricity. It's quite different. I want to read another scripture to you now. It's Psalm 139, verse 14. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, the thing of it is that we all live in our bodies, and we don't really think about them very much, do we? We don't really think about our human bodies very much. But actually, if you study the human body, I've been studying the human body for about 6 months, it is really, really complicated. And you think, my goodness me. There, for example, is a picture of, let's say, an athlete. Maybe from the Olympic Games. I don't know whether that is, but there you can see an athlete, and that is a really, really complicated human body. Let me just give you a few statistics about the human body. Let's say that particular athlete is 11 stone. Well, that body has 7 with 27 zeros after it, atoms in it. I'll say it again. In that human body, there are the number of atoms in that particular human body are 7 with 27 zeros after it. In other words, an awful lot of atoms. And they're made out of 60 different chemical elements. On the Earth, there are around about 88 different chemical elements. Well, we're made of the earth of the ground. The word Adam means clay or mud. But of the various 88 different elements, God has chosen 60 of them to make all the cells of our human body made of atoms. But he's used the DNA to form the atoms into individual cells. Now, there you've got a human cell. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking right now about the human cell. The human cell is really complicated. And remember, you've got 100 trillion of them. That is, if you like, what a basic cell looks like. If you looked inside the human body, you wouldn't see a cell like that, because they're all highly evolved. Sorry, I don't mean that word. They're all highly specialized. A heart cell looks completely different from a brain cell, and a brain cell looks completely different from a liver cell, etc., etc. But that is like, if you like, a generic cell. They've all got certain things in common, but a brain cell looks completely different from a heart cell because the genetic code within each cell has purposely programmed it to take up the different atoms, all the different elements, to make it into a different type of cell. Now, there are various people who've spent all their lives just studying cells. I'll just be coming on to the eye in a minute, but there's a chap called Dr. Michael Denton who's written a book called Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. And this is what he says, having studied the human body and the cells. He's a nuclear physicist. He says, no living system can be thought of as being primitive or ancestral. In other words, he's saying there's no such thing as a simple cell. There is no such thing as a simple cell. There's no evidence of any evolutionary sequence. There is no evidence of any evolutionary sequence amongst all the incredibly diverse cells on the earth. That's Dr. Michael Denton in his book, Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. So let's start. We're going to talk a little bit about the eyes and the ears. You're using your eye right now to look at me. And I want to tell you what the Bible actually says about the eye. I'm just going to read Proverbs chapter 20, verses 12 and 13 to you. The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. And Psalm 94, verse 9, it says, He who planted the ear, shall he not hear? He who formed the eye, shall he not see? So let's just talk a little bit about that eye you can see. You've actually got two of them, of course, because you see in stereoscopic vision. You're seeing everything in 3D. Now, right now, the television you're looking at, unless it's a very, very sophisticated one, isn't three-dimensional, but you see everything in 3 dimensions. And there's something else very special about your eye, is that I'm actually in a studio. It's a lovely studio, by the way, but I'm looking at a camera which is fixed, and I myself, I'm fixed. But sometimes, like you, I'm traveling in a car at maybe 50 miles an hour. So the two cameras here are traveling at 50 miles an hour and maybe focusing on another car going in the other way, also going at 50 miles an hour. So there are lots of little muscles around my eyes, moving my eye so that it concentrates on something else which is also moving. So I don't know if you realize how complicated that is. It's actually quite complicated to get everything right in this studio. But if this studio was traveling at 70 miles an hour, there'd be a whole lot more problems. There'll be a whole lot more problems to film this if the whole studio was traveling at 70 miles an hour. But for the human eye, there's no problem at all. At the back of the human eye, there are rods and cones which convert electrical photons, if you like, into electrical energy. I'm not going to spend any time talking about that at all because I have actually already done a whole program on the eye. So let's maybe move on and to talk about the ear. The ear is a really complicated piece of machinery. There are lots of sounds coming from my voice box, my larynx, and they're causing your eardrum to vibrate. And your eardrum is called a drum because it's kept very, very tense, like a drum, by a little tiny muscle called the tensor tympani muscle. And then the sounds are multiplied 22 times by tiny little ossicles. And then the sound waves go through to the inner part of the ear, which is called the cochlea. And within the cochlea, there's a wonderful membrane called the basilar membrane, which converts, it's like a harp. It converts all the sounds into electrical impulses which go to your brain, and that's how you hear. But that's not all your ears do. Your ears also have semicircular canals which actually help you to balance. That's why I'm not falling off my chair, and that's why you're not falling off your chair, because your semicircular canals have got little, tell your brain, your supercomputer if you like, where you are, so that all the various muscles contract so you don't fall off your chair. I'm just going to talk a little bit about our touch. I'm not going to spend very much time talking about our touch. I'll be talking about that in a later program. But it's actually one of the most refined devices ever discovered. And when we touch anything, we send these amazing impulses to our brain at 124 miles an hour. Let's think about our taste buds. Your taste buds are actually very, very complicated, and they don't last very long. They only last 10 days because they are so complicated. We produce a litre of saliva every day in order to get the food to go down our esophagus, our food pipe. One of the very good reasons we have very sophisticated taste buds is so that we can make sure that everything we eat is fresh and not going to cause us trouble. If I were to give you some food which had gone off, it wouldn't smell very nice and you wouldn't eat it. Quite right too. Your taste and your smell says, don't eat that. So that's one of the things that God has programmed into you, if you like, is when things are nice to eat and when they're not nice to eat. All right. I'd like to talk very briefly about our larynx. That's in your throat, and that's the little machine that enables us to speak. We can speak by causing our vocal cords to vibrate. And by the way, your voice doesn't sound like my voice. We all have individual voice patterns, if you like. A bit like our fingerprints, they're all different, and they're all made of different modulations and different vibrations and different tones and different frequencies. And I'm going to be spending a whole program just talking about how it is that we actually speak and create the sounds that we make. It's a really, really complicated piece of anatomy, is our larynx. And I'd like to move on now and talk about a skeleton now. We take our bones very much for granted, but actually they are really complicated. They're very, very complicated. They have all sorts of things to do. They provide, of course, strength for us. They support us so that we can stand upright. They protect our organs within our body. I'm going to be talking in another program about our joints, how they provide leverage. So that, for example, I can lift something up, something very light, but something very heavy, because of a principle called leverage. And also, I mentioned they protect, but within our bones, we all produce our blood cells. Our red blood cells are produced inside most of our bones. And of course, we need our red blood cells because that's how we carry oxygen around our body. You'll notice I'm actually just covering each of these different systems just very briefly. I'm not trying to give you, at this point, a very in-depth study on each individual system, just trying to give you an overview of each one. So let's just look at those muscles I mentioned. The muscles are really, really complicated. We've actually got about 600 of them. I hope you like smiling. Because smiling is actually much easier than frowning. If you smile, you use 20 muscles, and if you frown, you actually need to use 40. So it's actually much simpler to smile. So save yourself some energy and spend more time smiling than frowning. And I'm going to be spending a whole program talking about muscles and how it is that they contract. And it is really, really complicated. Just talk a little bit about the circulatory system. It's how the blood moves around our body, and how this amazing organ called our heart is a pump. It's in the center of our chest. It weighs about 3 pounds. It's not very big. And we've got all this blood that moves around our body, 9 or 10 pints of it. And it carries all the oxygen in our hemoglobin, which is an incredibly complicated molecule. It picks up all the oxygen from the air and delivers it safely into our muscles. And within our muscles, the oxygen is converted into energy in the mitochondria. ADP is converted into ATP. And that itself is very, very complicated. It's called the Krebs cycle. It's actually so complicated, I'll be spending another program just talking about the Krebs cycle. And no, it is so complicated, I can't begin to tell you how complicated it is. Just a few more systems. We have a nervous system. There's a picture of the nerves. We've actually got 45 miles of nerves going through our bodies. Can you imagine that? 45 miles of nerves coming from our brain. I've already mentioned the brain, which manufactures its own electricity. Well, the signals from the brain travel through 45 miles of nerves all over the body at 250 miles an hour. And the way that those electrical impulses are conducted is absolutely fantastic. I can't tell you about it now because it is so complex. It's all about sodium and potassium and calcium ions moving in and out of the cell membrane. Then we will be talking in the future about the skin. And the skin is the body's largest organ. You're familiar with your skin, but what you're not familiar with is how complicated it is. And I haven't got time to tell you now exactly how complicated it is, but trust me, it is very, very complicated. We have an immune system, which is very, very efficient, our immune system. It's the reason we don't get sick. You see, where I'm sitting and where you're sitting, wherever you are, you're surrounded by bacteria and viruses and fungi, and all of these things would kill us very quickly. But our immune system is incredibly good at keeping us well. Very, very few bacteria actually cause sickness. Very, very few viruses actually invade our body and cause sickness. Most of them are killed off before they've done anything nasty to our bodies with our immune system. I want to talk a little bit about the digestive system. It's basically the system. We eat our food, it goes to our stomach, which is about 1.5 liters in size, and then the food is processed to take away from the food all the various molecules of which the food is made and take them to the liver where it's processed, made into glycogen and glucose and all sorts of other things. I'll be telling you about that in the future. But one thing I do want to emphasize, this is really, really complicated. It's not simple. It is really, really complicated. Just have a little look at the lungs, the respiratory system. If I just tell you that our lungs are about the size of a tennis court. The surface area of our lungs is about the size of a tennis court. And using our lungs, we extract all the oxygen from the air and breathe out all this toxic carbon dioxide, which is acid, by the way. We need to get rid of that carbon dioxide because it's acid and basically is toxic to our bodies. So I want to emphasize to you just how amazingly complicated our human body is. There's a picture of, we're going to show you a picture of the liver, which is the chemical processing factory of our body. About 500 different chemical processes going on there all the time. You're not aware of it, but it's happening all the time. It's our central processing body. We've got some kidneys, and our kidneys just filter our blood and take away all the impurities. I'll be spending a whole program talking about the kidneys. And then we've got a reproductive system to make little babies, little versions of you and me. And by the way, they're not called fetuses, they're called babies. The Bible doesn't have a word called fetus. But, and the other thing is that life does start at conception. That's when our life started, right at conception. And we do have another very complicated system, which I was spending quite a lot of time on. It's a long word. It's homeostasis. I'm not even going to try at this point to explain that to you. What I'm going to tell you is what it's all about. You see, our body is a chemical factory, and we have to maintain oxygen at the right level, carbon dioxide at the right level, pH at the right level, the temperature at the right level, the metabolic rate at the right metabolic rate, and all sorts of other parameters. And I'm going to explain to you, or try to explain to you, even though it's quite complicated even me to understand it, just how this works and how complicated it all is. So let me just wind up and just tell you about the human body. I've just given you a little brief overview. It's the most complex machine on the earth. There's nothing even remotely close to the complexity of the human body. The brain is the most sophisticated computer in the universe. Our DNA is the most complex genetic code in the universe. Hemoglobin, which is designed to carry oxygen, is the most sophisticated example of molecular engineering ever discovered. I want to read a scripture to you. It's in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 28, and this is what it says. Do you not know, have you not heard, the Lord is an eternal God, the creator of the whole earth. He doesn't get tired or weary. There is no limit to his wisdom. Do send us some feedback on info@Revelation TV. I've also got a website. It's freechristianteaching.org. And you can see all these programs and lots of free DVDs as well on Free Christian Teaching. Thank you for joining us, and do join us again on To The Point. God bless you.